From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. And coming up today out of the Livestock Marketing Information Center, Jim Robb will provide this week's cattle market analysis. As part of that, Jim will share the LMIC's newly posted long-range cattle market outlook for 2020 and 2021. Then K-State's Walt Fick will talk about controlling woody tree species in pastures here in the fall with either a basal bark or cut-stump herbicide treatment. He'll go over the herbicide recommendations that have shown to be most effective in K-State field trials. And on this week's 4-H segment, Jeff Wickman talks with K-State's Deryl Waldren about the 2020 International Youth Exchange opportunities for Kansas 4-Hers right here on Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. Thanks for being along with us once more for another Agriculture Today. Jim Robb joining us, a senior economist at the Livestock Marketing Information Center based in Denver, a service, of course, co-sponsored by K-State and several other land-grant universities. Jim, the LMIC has put out its longer-range forecast on the beef cattle trade, and we want to dive into that there in a few moments. But let's take a look back at this past week. First of all, the fed cattle market, a little more good news building off of the previous week's bounce back.
That was the case, Eric, and fully $2 higher week over week in Kansas, and we seem to be on a pretty steady path there. The futures showed strong momentum also during the week, and so there were some signs that were improving that. On the calf and yearling side, there's not a lot of movement out in the country, but on balance, looking across Kansas and Oklahoma, we were a little bit stronger on the calves and yearlings. There were a couple markets a little bit down, but there was a little bit of momentum, especially on the limited calf sales that occurred with some stronger prices week over week. So, we've been through a really tough time in the sector, the fire, et cetera, and, we seem to be working through that. The cutout also was following this pattern of moving towards normalization, if we can use a word like that. The cutout was lower week over week, down nearly $4 a hundredweight. Cutouts back to the levels at 214 and change on the choice. That's reflective of late July of this year. But the undercurrent was positive in terms of the volume. Those lower prices did spark a lot of purchases. In fact, movement in the cash trade, the meat cash trade, on the choice side was the largest for any week since the last week of July. So we really did, with those lower prices, the market did its job and really put through a very solid volume on the meat side. So, the market, it's still a struggle. We still have the repercussions of the fire at the plant, but, things are turning more normal. I think I'd like to leave that as kind of the general assessment of the last week's trends.
One of the past week's developments that's well worth mentioning here, Jim, is that announced trade agreement with Japan. And all in the cattle industry are quite well aware of how crucial that market is to beef exports. It's been a long-time reliable customer of U.S. beef. But what is the significance of that agreement in your view, and as far as the beef cattle sector moving forward?
Well, I think this is very significant. Now, these things are always a little bit slow to... we have to get the whole sector in Japan now geared up, but certainly going to put the U.S. on a more level playing field with our competitors around the world with respect to Japan, and that's very positive. As you mentioned, this is a high-value market and a market that can afford to pay for our premium types of product. And beyond beef, this is also very positive, and for the competing meats, this is going to allow more pork into Japan and more chicken also. So the big picture of the animal protein complex, this is a positive development, very positive, but it takes time for the system to really adapt to those types of changes in terms of the logistics and getting contracts in place, et cetera, et cetera. But again, leveling the playing field is usually very good for the U.S. beef industry.
Jim, want to visit about a couple of things in the more extended outlook, if we might. In a second, again, we do want to talk of that really long-range outlook that you and the LMIC staff have put together, even extending to the year 2021. But you also have some information on your website recently on the trend in female beef slaughter, which continues to escalate. That, in turn, could portend something for the cattle inventory at some point. Tell us about those numbers.
Well, those numbers will have some implications for the cattle inventory come January 1, 2020. And especially on the heifer slaughter side, these numbers have been very large and posting large gains year over year. And last year we had very large levels of heifer slaughter. So the biggest dynamic has been large increases in heifer slaughter, which have actually gained momentum in recent weeks in USDA's actual slaughter data. And then beef cow slaughter has also picked up in the latest weekly data year over year, again from the very high levels of a year ago. Now this has added pressure back again into the cull cow price profile, but it certainly does set the stage for the January 1, 2020 beef cow inventory to be down fully 0.5%, maybe even closer to 1% year over year. Now we still have several months to go in this calendar year, but the profile is clearly developing. The female slaughter in the U.S. beef cow side of the industry has been very aggressive this year, and the surprise has been the level of heifer slaughter.
Does this suggest in any way that we will see an extended trend of cow herd contraction then moving into and through 2020?
Well, I think the general trend we maybe don't have a contraction that's as large as some of the past cattle cycles, but it certainly sets the trend that the peak is behind us in terms of the cattle inventory, and 2020 and 2021 look to be tightening numbers, and tightening numbers most aggressively in terms of slaughter levels, in terms of heifer slaughter and cow slaughter posting large year-over-year declines as we start to slow the rate of decline in the herd. It has a large impact back in terms of total beef tonnage. In the last several weeks, we've had year-over-year declines consistently in steer slaughter, reflecting the size of the calf crop, but our total production levels have been bolstered by this female slaughter component, and that picture, we think, really starts to change in 2020.
And that transitions us into that aforementioned extended outlook on the market into next year and perhaps the early part of the year beyond 2021. How does that read in general, Jim?
Well, this is, longer-term outlook, Eric, and there's a lot of moving parts. But let's kind of do some big picture comparisons. As we look at 2019, our total commercial beef production is going to be up about 1.2% year over year. Now, the biggest increase was back in the third quarter, but 1.2% increase this year. And we're going to have fed cattle prices down about 2.2%. Now, we remember that the fourth quarter of this year is going to be the largest year-over-year decline due to the circumstances of the fire, et cetera. Mm-hmm. But we look ahead to 2020, and we expect beef production in the U.S. to be up only, unchanged to up 1%. So that'll be the smallest increase since 2015. So we're looking at less than a 1% increase in beef output in 2020. And that gives us, in terms of fed cattle, actually a year-over-year increase in prices. So, we've had a lot of struggles on the fed cattle side this year, especially late this year, but, this picture can change rather quickly as we look ahead. And then on the calf market, we see some similar developments, whereby the fourth quarter of 2020, this calf market in the Southern Plains, we have it averaging in the upper 160s for a 500 to 600 pound steer into the lower 170s. Well, that's the strongest, Eric, for the fourth quarter since the fourth quarter of 2015. Now, the fourth quarter of 2015 was one of the high water marks in the industry, and we had calf prices at over $2 a pound. We're not expecting those levels. But we think as we look further ahead, barring a U.S. economy that maybe even heads even a little weaker this demand profile for beef domestically and internationally probably still stays relatively strong. So we're projecting total production in 2021 to be down 1 to 2% year over year. So the big show of this cyclical adjustment in terms of the breeding herd, et cetera, starts to show up more clearly in 2021. And we're looking at that year of a fed cattle market that's up 3 to 4% year over year. That's a pretty strong year-to-year change. And a calf market that, again, adds some more depth. Again, not back to 2015 levels, but these calf prices, barring a shortage on the corn crop in the U.S. and maybe some other things going right, we look ahead to 2021 as being, much better for cow-calf operations. So these longer-term cyclical aspects will be dominant to the industry. The wild card is always on the demand side, both domestic and foreign. But kind of holding those constant, the supply side will start to give some noticeable help to cattle prices over the next 2 years.
And that was the follow-up thought. If we would see, for example, something of a hike in beef exports, if our trade murkiness clears up, so much the better then, Jim.
Absolutely, Eric. The other kind of behind-the-scenes unknown is both the exports, but the U.S. production of pork and chicken at the same time, we are forecasting continues to ramp up, especially the recent hogs and pigs report, the last two, especially the one this last Friday, is a surprise to the high side in terms of U.S. pork output, and it's driven by pigs per litter at record levels. So, a little bit of the headwind for the beef industry is the total red meat and poultry supply, but we factored that in. Cyclically, we're a little bit optimistic that the next 2 years will be better than 2019 turned out to be rather significantly.
Well, producers, if you'd like to read more about these outlooks and the other information that the LMIC has collected, it's all posted on the center's website, which is very simply lmic.info. Appreciate the overview. Jim, many thanks, and we will catch up with you again quite soon.
It's been my pleasure, Eric.
Senior economist with the Livestock Marketing Information Center, Jim Robb, featured on this week's cattle market segment here on Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
We're back now on Agriculture Today. These next few moments for you grassland managers who routinely contend with invasive woody brush species in your pastures. As we look at the fall season, there may be a window of opportunity for effective control of those species. We'll get into that now with range and pasture management specialist Walt Fick of K-State Research and Extension. Walt, before we talk about chemical control options here, what species can we typically effectively control here with a fall approach?
Well, fall is just one of the time periods we happen to be coming into that time of the year. The basal bark and cut-stump treatments can actually be done most times of the year, frankly. But, fall, sometimes you got a long window of opportunity there. Maybe things have to get planting done and harvest. Maybe get time to spend doing this sort of treatments. And so that's why fall's a good time. Mm-hmm. But most all of the woody plants you can think of can be effectively treated this way. I'm normally thinking of tree-type species, not so much brush like, dogwood and buckbrush, sumac. Those, we're probably going to contend with those with probably foliar treatments. But trees, and particularly probably number one on that list would be common honey locust. That's the one I get the most questions about, at least. And occasionally the related species, black locust. Same treatments work on that species as well. And then, of course, there's Osage orange or hedge. That's pretty common throughout the state. That'd probably be about the second one on the list. But then, lots of other ones. There's elms, cottonwoods, willows in some cases, along some of our major rivers, more so in west and southwest Kansas. Salt cedar is another problem species we deal with.
Let's talk about basal bark treatment for a moment. And the approach here is pretty straightforward. You're treating around the collar of that tree right at the base.
Yeah, right from the ground level, and normally at least 12, 15 inches high. It might depend somewhat on the diameter of the tree, but, a good-sized tree, even once 2 or 3 inches, we'd want to treat that lower 15 inches or so. And you want to make sure you treat all the way around. If you want to convince yourself sometime, just go out there and treat one side of that and see what happens, and indeed about half the tree will survive. So it's important to treat all the way around, right to the ground level.
As far as product selection for the basal bark approach?
Well, probably the main one that gets used, the workhorse, so to speak, would be Remedy Ultra. Remedy was around. Now they changed the trade name. It's basically the same stuff, a little different carrier, but Remedy Ultra would be the key one. And, the label, I think, says 20 to 30% in a diesel or basal oil carrier would work as well. Let's say 25%. So one part chemical and 3 parts diesel. That would be a common treatment. That's what the label says. And, of course, you don't want to exceed label. That'd be off-label. But frankly, if you find out that a lower concentration might work, you can do that, and that's not a problem. And that seems to be the case, I think, with hedge in particular. I've gone out in a warm day in January and basal bark treated hedge trees with 5% Remedy, and it worked quite well. So there's a lot of species on the label. Some of them are more difficult to control than others.
So triclopyr, to refer to it by the active ingredient, a good alternative here. But that's not the only option available, you remind us.
Oh, there are others as well. Pasture Guard is somewhat of a Pasture Guard HL, can be used for basal bark control and with similar results. And I think the label there is the same. It's 25% in diesel or oil carrier. Depending on the tree, we'll talk maybe specifically about honey locust, but milestone, it doesn't have as broad a spectrum, whereas Pasture Guard and Remedy work on a large number of woody plants. Milestone is basically only effective on the locust species, but as a basal bark treatment, it can be used. I think it's 3 to 5%. Don't put it in diesel. We have to find an oil carrier that is compatible with. I know there, and I usually don't use too many trade names other than the herbicides we're talking about, but there's a product called LMIC I know that Milestone is compatible with, and it works. If you aren't sure, you got some crop oil on hand and you want to try Milestone on locust species as a basal bark, do what I just call a little jar test. Take a little herbicide, put the oil in, see if they mix together and stay in solution. If it gels up right away, well, it's probably not very compatible.
But in any case, whatever basal bark treatment you're using, you want to assure thorough coverage around the diameter of that tree. And you must achieve that to be successful.
Yes, that's quite important.
That's for the basal bark option if that's preferred by the pasture manager. The cut-stump treatment, yet another, which of course takes a little more physical labor to drop that tree. But once you do cut it down, treating that stump can be highly effective in preventing a resprout, right?
Yes, and we have kind of a rule of thumb. We're talking about basal bark versus cut stump. You can use either method on a lot of these trees. Once trees get to be maybe 4-6 inches in diameter, then we probably would recommend going to a cut stump approach, because in theory, you only really need to treat that outer inch or so of the cut surface. That's where the cambium, the living tissue is, and that's where you need to emphasize putting the herbicide. Mm-hmm. Now, if that cut stump isn't right at the ground level, you got lower part of that trunk still present, you probably need to treat that, not only the cut surface, but that bark on the lower part of the tree as well.
So cut it level to the ground as much as you can if you're strictly going with the cut stump option. And as far as product selection here, same chemistry can work? Pretty much.
Again, probably one of them that has been used a lot on cut stump would be, it's been around quite a while, it's called Crossbow. It's a mixture of the triclopyr that's in the Remedy and then 2,4-D, but 4% of that product in a diesel or an oil carrier seems to work quite well on a number of trees, hedge and I think elms, oaks type species. But then, Remedy Ultra, Pasture Guard, again, the Milestone, which again works strictly on the locust trees pretty much, it's only 10%, but you can mix it in water. You don't have to put it with an oil on the cut surface. So that's good. Some of the times, these trees, depends on where they're occurring. If they're in riparian areas or there's more sensitive sites where we might want to avoid using diesel. Or another one of the cut stump treatments we have is Tordon 22K, picloram. Well, again, we know it's very water soluble, so you got to be careful where you put it out. But that one, again, it will work on locusts, works on oaks, elms, those sort of trees, and just put in with water.
How important, though, Walt, is it for one to apply the cut stump treatment as swiftly as possible once that tree is actually cut?
Well, I think that's a good recommendation to do most of the time, and sometimes that can be somewhat problematic. Depends on your labor force. If you have somebody cutting off and somebody following that up right away, treating that works quite well. If it's just one person job, and of course there are machines out there where they're cutting and spraying, have the nozzle right associated behind the cutting blade, so that can be done fairly quickly. I used to kind of maybe kiddingly say, you want to treat that stump before the tree hits the ground, just to emphasize that it needs to be done, in a fairly quick fashion.
But you don't have to get in too much of a hurry, although it might seem that sap would start to shield that stump from the treatment.
The cut surface may have a tendency to callus over, and I think a lot of the oil-based products can kind of get around that problem. The other issue, of course, here in the fall, and maybe another reason why fall and winter can be a good time is what sap flow was in that tree, even with a cut surface, would have been downward. If you wait and do it in the spring, those plants are trying to take water up, so you might get some washing effect from water trying to flow out of that cut surface, and that could dilute some of those products that we use.
So another good reason to get this done in the fall. One final thought here, Walt, and it's in the article on this topic. If one is treating non-cropland or non-pasture land, there might be a little more latitude in what they'd use to treat these species, right?
Yeah, so there's a product I know it gets commonly used a lot of places, Tordon RTU, or the other name for that is Pathway. Those are products that contain picloram, the active ingredient that's in Tordon, and then some 2,4-D. And I think they're very effective, but they're not labeled for use on range and pasture, primarily because of the carrier. I think they use antifreeze as a carrier, and we know that can be pretty toxic to animals if they happen to lick much of that up. So they aren't labeled. You can use them in non-cropland areas around the homestead, down the fence line, but you're not supposed to be using them out where the animals are actually grazing.
Always adhere to the label, of course. There is an article that covers the options fully on controlling these woody brush species on grasslands, basal bark or cut stump treatment, whichever one you prefer, in the latest Agronomy E-Update newsletter out of K-State. You might reference that at agronomy.ksu.edu, posted on September the 20th. Walt, we appreciate you letting us know the alternatives that producers have in dealing with these species at this time of the year. Many thanks.
Oh, thanks, Eric. Good to be with you today.
He is a range and pasture management specialist with K-State Research and Extension, Walt Fick. Agriculture Today will be back in a few moments on the K-State Radio Network.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Today's agricultural news headlines now, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, the top leaders of the House and Senate both made remarks last week relative to the U.S. Mexico-Canada trade agreement. According to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, quoting her, "We are moving ahead on the agreement." She told reporters that they're hoping to be on a continued path to yes. Now, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell told Democrats that the time for excuses is over, in his words. He said that the continued objections to the new agreement are not much more than heel-dragging, suggesting a chief reason for the PAC's delay is the House's impeachment inquiry and related investigations. Well, the LMIC's Jim Robb referred to it earlier in our broadcast. The U.S. hog and pig inventory is as large as it's been in many, many years. The USDA's Gary Crawford takes a look.
Friday's USDA quarterly report on hogs and pigs has this word quite a lot.
Record, all-time record.
USDA livestock analyst Shanika Herron, the report showing the highest total September 1 inventory and market hog inventory in at least 31 years when USDA started keeping track, and the biggest summer quarter pig crop in at least 49 years, plus the highest average pigs per litter ever. Shanika Herron says all of this driven partly by growing processing capacity, plus things looking better on the export front. And in recent weeks,
we saw a healthy increase going to China, as well as increases in exports picking up to Mexico after they removed tariffs this summer.
Now, hog producers are slowing down a bit on farrowings. Sows farrowed in the summer quarter down 1% from the same time frame a year ago. Farrowing intentions for the fall and winter quarters also down, but pork production still climbing due to
a larger breeding herd and gains in productivity.
Plus, USDA forecasting higher hog prices next year. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
The K-State Animal Sciences and Industry Department is staging a big event this Friday, and there's still time to be part of it. Here's more from Agriculture Today's Britton Rucker. Britton?
Eric, coming up this Friday is the 5th annual K-State Animal Sciences and Industries Department Family and Friends Reunion. This event will take place at the Stanley Stout Center in Manhattan and is set to kick off at 5:30 with dinner, live entertainment, and even a junior wildcat barnyard area designed for the youngest members of the AS&I family. K-State animal scientist Dave Nichols welcomes alumni and friends back to campus and the opportunity to reconnect with friends, faculty, staff, and students.
One of the things that has always impressed me by this is that there's kind of something for everybody. And, well, just start with some of the activities. There's a kiddie barnyard that really appeals to all these kids. We have, of course, a lot of reminiscing, older people coming back. And then there's all the group in between. One thing that has impressed me is how we are able to attract the long-term supporters, but we're also getting some recent graduates and then kind of everything in between. So it's really a great evening of food and friendship and fellowship and music and just a good time.
The evening will be capped off with the presentation of the Don L. Good Impact Award, this year going to the Kansas Livestock Association.
When you say Don Good, that's a legend. He was one of a kind. And to have an award with his name attached to it, when you say Don Good Impact, that speaks a lot. And we've had 5 of those, and now a KLA. And KLA does so much for our industry, and so we're honored we have them as our honoree this year.
Once again, the ASI Family and Friends Reunion is set for this Friday at the Stanley Stout Center, beginning at 5:30. Walk-in registration may be limited. So if you're thinking of attending, please consider registering by today. The scheduled information and more is available online at asi.kstate.edu/friends and family. For questions about the event, contact Lois Schreiner at 785-532-1267. Once again, that number is 785-532-1267. For Agriculture Today, I'm Britton Rucker. Back to you, Eric.
Thanks, Britton, and we hope to see as many of you as possible at that gathering coming this Friday. Now it's on to this week's edition of Tree Tales with K-State Forester Bob Atkinson. Bob?
Wednesday, October 9th, the Kansas Forest Service will be hosting the 25th Annual Fall Forestry Field Day just north of Manhattan at the Geyer Forestry Research Center. The Forestry Research Center offers a variety of beautiful woodlands where over 55 years of research has occurred to help Kansans grow the best quality black walnut, bur oak, and other valuable Kansas trees. The field day brings together a great network of Kansas farmers, landowners, foresters, wildlife biologists, and loggers to share collective experience and the latest research for the holistic management of Kansas woodlands and related natural resources. In addition to an overview of the ongoing research at the center, participants will tour a black walnut seed orchard that provides a source of superior walnut seed. Tom Hogard will help landowners understand how to create lumber products from their own trees using a portable sawmill demonstration. Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks and Tourism wildlife biologists Byron Brown and Corey Alderson will provide suggestions on creating improved habitat for birds and other wildlife. Ryan Armbruster, Kansas Forest Service Forest Health Specialist, will offer hands-on demonstrations on the control of bush honeysuckle and other invasive plants. Katie Brinkman, Midwest Regional Manager of the American Tree Farm System, will also be there and help landowners understand the resources available to them through their nonprofit to help woodland owners accomplish their most important projects. A hot lunch will be offered at the Jamaican Little Grill, immediately adjacent to the Research Center. The afternoon session will take folks to Potawatomi Fishing Lake, where Kansas Forest Service forester Howard Ferkson will discuss forest management strategies, and foresters Dennis Carlson and Jason Hartman the role of prescribed fire in Kansas woodlands. An $18 registration fee covers lunch and other expenses. You are invited to register online at www.kansasforest.org by clicking on News and Events, or by simply calling the Kansas Forest Service at 785-532-3300. This is Bob Atkinson with the Kansas Forest Service, encouraging you to enjoy our beautiful Kansas woodlands this fall by participating in the Fall Forestry Field Day. You've been listening to another Tree Tale.
Thanks, Bob. And again, kansasforests.org for full information on that event coming up quite soon. We'll be back with more shortly. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. Kansas 4-H has partnerships with several countries that allows 4-H members, families, and alumni to be involved in international youth exchange programs. The registration for next year's Global Citizenship Exchange programs is currently underway. Retired Northwest Area 4-H Specialist and Extension Coordinator for Global Citizenship, Deryl Waldren, previews the opportunities for travel in 2020. Deryl, there are a number of opportunities to travel or host abroad in 2020.
Indeed, and that's hard for people to begin to think about now. It's only September, going into October, but we need to begin to think about what you would like to do for summer of 2020. And that deadline for all 2020 applications is going to be November 1st that they're due in, and I'll just cover it now. The easiest way to get to those applications is to go to the Kansas 4-H main website page, which is www.kansas4-h.org. And when you get to the home page, you'll see on the right side what's hot, and you can click on that link to take you to that page with the applications.
Go ahead and cover, first of all, the different opportunities that are available, and then the programs that are available within.
Okay, Kansas 4-H participates with States 4-H International Exchange Programs, which is a group out of Seattle, and they offer both programs to send 4-H members as well as for 4-H families to host people from around the world. And then we also still participate with the International 4-H Youth Exchange, or IFE, and Kansas can send as well as host from around the world there too. So those are the two programs that we deal with. So let's cover states 4-H now for people wanting to go somewhere. So next summer, let's say you want to travel to a country, there are a lot of increased options for next summer. So where you could go next summer for about 4 weeks, except for Japan, you have an option there of longer, and I'll cover that in a little bit. You could go to Costa Rica, and these are in June and July mostly. You could also go to Norway, South Korea, Taiwan, and Romania. So Taiwan and Romania are new for 2020. And then the flagship program is Japan. You could go for 4 weeks, which would be from July and August, or you could go for 8 weeks and have a bit of a extensive language training and stay with them and have a different kind of opportunity. So those are the places where 4-H members, and mostly from 15 to 18, could go abroad next summer on an exchange program.
What are some of the things that they learn while they're on these travel experiences?
For all of these programs, what makes it unique, or one of the things that makes it unique, is they get a home stay. They stay and live with a family and get to experience life in that country through the family. There may be more than one family. For Japan, for example, if you go for 8 weeks, you're going to have 2 families experience. And depending on the country, most countries would have one family, but there might be a situation where they would have 2 families in the 4-week period. They also learn about that culture up close. They're learning some language while they're there, because while some family members may speak English, they may not, and so you have to begin to figure out how to communicate without a common language.
They're really immersed in the family lifestyle.
That's one of the cornerstones of 4-H International Exchange programs, is that we have that homestay and you're not a tourist, you're a traveler living and experience that country through the eyes of the families that you live with.
Which is exactly the same thing as when they come to stay with a host family here.
Right, and we know that not everybody can go to another country, but what we encourage is that you, as a Kansas 4-H family, can open your home to a variety of people from different countries, and I'll cover some of those options. So next summer, Kansas 4-H families will have the opportunity to host from Japan for sure, and that's been a program that Kansas has participated with in the Kansas 4-H Japanese Exchange since 1977. And they come to Kansas on July 21st. They go to the host families on the July 23rd, stay there till August 17th, and then they fly out again on August 18th. Some of the other options that you would have for next summer to host would be from South Korea, Taiwan, Finland, or Costa Rica. As a family, you would have to apply, and you would perhaps, if you were selected, host a member from one of those countries for about 4 weeks.
What are some of the things that you should consider if you want to be a host family? What are some things that you need to take into account, I guess?
Well, you need to be open to receiving somebody in your family and be inclusive and want to learn about a different culture, because they're going to come and want to share with you some about their country. It also means that you can share with them about Kansas and the United States. So you need to be open to that whole concept. The Japanese program, it's a little bit more restrictive in the sense you have to have a sibling, a same-gender sibling, plus or minus 2 years to host that person. So the main thing would be to inquire what are the requirements to host for that particular program. One that we also don't mention as much would be the academic year program, and we used to call it the high school exchange. And we now have a host of countries that we can host from, and these include not only Japan and Korea, South Korea, but also many of the Eurasian countries, the former Soviet republics, Eastern Europe, and Mexico through this academic year program. And they come to Kansas in August, and they stay till June, and they go to high school for a year. And again, that doesn't require you to have a high schooler in that age group. Any family could host if they were willing to get involved with that. So that's a wonderful experience where you open your home to a high school student from another country.
You mentioned the application process. There's also an interview associated with this?
Yes. The applications are due November 1, and the interviews are going to be November 24th in Junction City. And so the key thing is to get your application in with the references, and then you'll be contacted, and they'll give you the details about the actual interviews.
I guess when it comes to picking a country that a youth might want to visit, are there some things that they should think about, their interests, or what maybe goes into deciding maybe where they want to go?
Could be a variety of factors. Sometimes that somebody just has a passion about a country, and maybe they've always had a huge interest in Japan, and so maybe they would, it's a natural. But many times they maybe don't necessarily know where they want to go, but they just need to be open to experiencing a new culture, and pretty much then any country would be a rewarding experience because you're open to experiencing new things. One thing I did forget to mention was that IFI is for alumni from 19 to 25, where States 4-H is, again, for 4-H members currently in Kansas 4-H who have been in Kansas 4-H.
And again, all of the information is on the Kansas 4-H website. Start there and get those applications filled out and turned in.
Right, and I would like to make note of our coordinators that we have. We have 3 coordinators working with these programs in Kansas. Rose Scott works with the Japanese inbound program, and that's the Japanese coming to Kansas. Her contact information is on the website in several places. Mary Kay Menson does a variety program. She does the States 4-H programs, or pretty much everything except the Japanese inbound. Her contact information is also on the website. And then Chelsea Champlin, she works exclusively with the inbound IFI. That's finding host families for IFIs coming to Kansas during the summer. So have worked with 3 people to make these programs all happen throughout the year.
That's retired Northwest Area 4-H specialist and extension coordinator for global citizenship, Deryl Waldren. Again, more information on international exchange opportunities is available online at kansas4h.org. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.